Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Thursday, day 5 of the Vietnam War. Hopefully, you guys got your discussion board done yesterday on Wednesday, and you're continuing to work on reading questions and vocab. This will be our last video lecture for the week, all right? And so we're going to talk a few different things in this. We're going to talk about transition of power in the United States from Johnson to Nixon. We're also going to talk about some incidents that happened in Vietnam that really turned public perception negative in the United States. And we're going to talk about how Nixon views the war and things that he's going to do to try and make the war come to an end, and some promises that Nixon makes that he actually can't follow through on. And so stay tuned. Let's get ready to go into this. Hopefully you guys are, we're almost all the way through the week. Thursday and Friday is all we got left. So let's make it great, and let's get to the weekend, all right? So Johnson had been sitting there while he was president, and, in 1968, after the Tet Offensive and the increased troop movement and the negative push at home and the hawks and the doves and all this stuff's just really building on him. And he's like, I don't know what to do. And he can run for re-election, all right, in 68. But Johnson doesn't know if he wants to continue living with being the president of blame for the war in Vietnam. All these Americans are coming home and dying. So Johnson decides not to run for re-election. After the Tet Offensive, polls showed that only 26% of Americans approved of LBJ's conduct of the war. They just didn't understand this whole mentality of kill count and why we keep increasing troop levels. And Johnson's really not the person to blame. His general in charge, Westmoreland, was the one that kept asking for more soldiers, and he trusted him. You got to listen to your superiors and commanding officers in the military. And even though Johnson is the commander-in-chief, he's not a soldier. He is not there on the front lines in Vietnam, so he has to listen to what his military advisors are telling him. If they tell him, hey, the only way to win this war is to kill all these Vietnamese people, then that's what he's going to do. If they ask for more troops, that's what he's going to give them. Yet, he's the one that's going to take the blame. No one's going to say, well, General Westmoreland's the reason why we're losing this war. No, they're going to say, President Johnson's the reason why we're not winning this war. All right? He's not doing an effective job as a leader. LBJ saw Tet as a political catastrophe. How could we be caught by surprise? How do we allow them to have a surprise attack on us? Isn't this something we should have done? Shouldn't we have had a surprise attack on Hanoi in the north and had uprisings throughout the countryside? And so that's really hard for Johnson to fathom. He was like, why are we always one step behind the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong? We are an elite superpower of a country, yet we're allowing this developing third world country to get the best of us, it seems like. General Westmoreland asked the president for 206,000 more troops after the Tet Offensive. So he wants to get almost up to 1 million soldiers in Vietnam. LBJ decided to reject the increase. He was like, no, you just keep escalating this war, yet you're the one escalating it, and I'm the one that's taking the blame for it. And rightfully so. A good leader is going to do that, right? He's not going to blame his teammates. He's not going to blame the people below him. So Johnson's not going to sit there and say, well, my generals are idiots, all right? He's going to say, hey, this was my decision. I put him in charge of this. He's not doing an effective job, so I will be the one that gets the repercussion of it. LBJ then removed Westmoreland as commander of the United States forces. So this is something we're kind of used to seeing today. President Trump usually hires and fires people quite frequently, right? And so this is not uncommon. A lot of presidents do this. Think about Lincoln went through like 4 generals during the Civil War. And so he's going to look at Westmoreland and say, I don't agree with your tactics and your strategy, but I'm not going to come out and bash you to the American public. I'm just going to remove you from your command, and I'm going to put someone else in command of our troops in Vietnam. On March 31st, 1968, Johnson said he would seek peace negotiations and would not run for re-election. And so he makes this televised announcement to the country, trying to save himself in their perspective of how people view him, of, hey, I'm going to try and get peace negotiations. I'm going to try and end the war so people like me again. And at the same time, I'm not going to run for president. I'm going to allow you to pick someone else. You guys are so angry. You're so upset. You have a new choice in who you want to lead you. So the chaotic election of 1968, when I say chaotic, it was nuts, all right? So Robert Kennedy, who a lot of people just assume, like, hey, this would be the perfect choice. He's JFK's old brother. He was our Secretary of State. Like, he knows how to do everything, Okay, he's a politician through and through. People loved him. He had that charisma. We're getting back to the early 60s, the Age of Camelot, Part 2, right? Everything's going to be great with Kennedy. Only problem is not everyone liked Kennedy. The curse of the Kennedys happens. Robert Kennedy was assassinated on the campaign trail by a lone gunman. And actually, he was out in California giving a speech at a hotel, goes back in the kitchen as he's going to leave, gets shot by the gunman. So that's a second Kennedy brother that's killed. Now you have JFK and you have Robert Kennedy that are both dead within a few years of one another in the 1960s, and both of them had really high political aspirations. Someone who wasn't going to run for president, but was a major voice, especially for the Democratic Party, and obviously someone that was influential in the civil rights. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was also assassinated not too long after Robert Kennedy. Outside of his hotel room. And so you see these two huge figures that people have a lot of respect for and people thought could really push the democratic movement in the United States are both now all of a sudden gone. So who are they left with? Well, they're going to ask LBJ, like, hey, LBJ, we need you to back someone. So, of course, he's going to back his vice president. LBJ backed Herbert Humphrey, his vice president. Now, Humphrey, there's nothing wrong with the guy, but everyone's just going to associate him with LBJ, right? So what's he going to do with Vietnam? Well, exactly what LBJ did. He's just going to increase troop levels. He's the same exact person. He's a clone of him. That's why he was his vice president, all right? The thing that hurts Humphrey is there was a riot of protesters and police at the Democratic National Convention in which protesters are killed. And so now you see this person, this Democratic nominee, that looks even more like a warmonger, all right, just like LBJ, because nothing can happen peaceful around this political party. So the Democrats pretty much know going in, if Robert Kennedy wasn't going to be the person, they really didn't stand a chance. Because as soon as LBJ put his stamp on somebody, they were pretty much doomed. Now, if LBJ would have backed Robert Kennedy, that would have been fine because people would have still overridden LBJ and said, that's JFK's brother. The Republicans nominated someone who came very close to winning the presidency, all the way back in 1960. That is Richard Nixon. Remember, Nixon just barely lost to Kennedy, so people like him, all right? People associate him with Eisenhower as well because he was Dwight D. Eisenhower's vice president. So they're like, if there's anybody that knows military tactics, is a good politician, I bet it's that Richard Nixon guy. Little did they know, he didn't trust anybody, all right? Nixon won the election based on bringing peace in Vietnam and security at home. So his political platform, peace, right? I'm going to Vietnam and I'm going to create peace. And it's going to be the safest place is the United States. Well, a couple things happen. There are more race riots in the United States that happen under Nixon. And he escalates the war in Vietnam. More intense bombing, more soldiers being sent. So he kind of goes back on his word and what he tells the American people he's going to do. Here you have kind of a map and looking at how the election kind of broke down. If you notice, there was actually a third candidate, Henry Wallace, that ran on pretty much in the South, and he was for segregation. Hence why he wins places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. He is the governor of Alabama. So it makes sense with his policies why those states voted for him. But if you look at the rest of the country, I mean, the rest of the country is predominantly red, which is Nixon, the Republican. And so most Americans vote for Nixon. Now, if you notice something, too, is different about this landscape of this map. California votes Republican, and Texas votes Democrat, right? Well, one, LBJ was from Texas, right? But remember we talked about the South is starting to get that switch in ideology. They're no longer the Southern Democrats. They're now becoming Republicans, all right? So that's why the Deep South and some of those southern states are now voting Republican. California at this time didn't have that major movement in Silicon Valley and places like that, and Los Angeles wasn't as big. So you're still seeing a lot of conservative movement coming from this area. There is our presidential winner. You see on the next slide, Richard Nixon. You know, I'm not a crook. All right. So the carrot and the stick. Peace talks and Vietnamization. Peace talks began in Paris in May 1968. So Nixon's living up to his word. he is going to create peace in Vietnam. Look, he's already sending out delegations. It's already starting. Henry Kissinger went back in 1969 to restart peace talks with North Vietnam because it kind of broke down in 68. We were a little bit too far apart in what we wanted. He said that he would end bombing of North Vietnam, which was kind of the carrot, the incentive for the North Vietnamese, for troop withdrawal in the South and for the South to remain independent. So, hey, we'll stop bombing all of your cities and killing all of your people if you remove your troops from the South and South can remain independent. So pretty much go into what Korea is, right? North communist, South independent. The North rejected this. The North's like, there's no way we're going to do this. We're controlling this war. We have people in Vietnam that are on our side, all right? Nixon then said the South would take over the war while American GIs withdrew. And that makes a lot of Americans happy. They're like, oh, this is great. We're going to be coming home. The South's going to take over. But this is a catastrophe because the South isn't ready to fight on their own. They're not well trained. We've been doing this war all by ourselves. So if we allow them to try and take over this war, it's not going to be efficient. And they're surely going to lose. The plan for Vietnamization was set in three main goals for the South. First, self-government. They need to run it themselves. Two, self-development. They need to build their own country. And three, self-defense. If you notice, Vietnamization is pretty much saying who's responsible for the Vietnam War now? The South. Self, self, and self, right? They need to take care of all their issues, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's financially, whether it's fighting the war. It is not the Americans that need to do this, all right? So the stick. If they're not enticed by the carrot, how do we get the North to move? Well, you beat them with the stick, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? So you have a stick, you're dangling a carrot out in front, making that person run towards it because you're enticing them. Well, if that person doesn't want to run, they're standing there. Well, how are you going to make them move? Well, yeah, hit them with the stick, right? Hit them in the back, they're going to get going. They'll start moving towards that carrot. So what is the stick? Widening the air war and invading Cambodia. So we're going to make the war larger to try and bring an end to the actual conflict. What are you doing, bud? My son's got a samurai sword back here. I think it's a Batman one. I don't know what he's doing. Yeah, he's really getting into this. Nixon went with the madman theory and trying to end the war, which he is. He's kind of nuts. So he even threatens nuclear attack on the North. Now, everyone knows he's not going to follow through on this. There would be too many UN sanctions that would come out of this. This would cause chaos throughout if we're using nuclear weapons on a communist country. So there are a lot of issues that would happen with this. In March 1969, Nixon had secretly ordered B-52s to begin bombing Cambodia. This lasted about 4 years. So it's not like it's going to end anytime quick. So his idea of bringing an end to the war they told the American people isn't going to happen. He's actually widening the war and creating it larger. In April 1970, he ordered U.S. troops to invade Cambodia. He did this to show he was serious about containment. In 1971, Nixon invaded Laos. Why do we have to do that? The Ho Chi Minh Trail runs through Cambodia and Laos. If you want to win the war, you have to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You have a few images here of American air superiority, of us dropping bombs on North Vietnam. You can then see a picture of where he's going to invade into Cambodia and Laos. Now, when we say we're going to invade into Cambodia and Laos, we're only actually going a few miles in. We're not going all the way into the country, only to where the Ho Chi Minh Trail is. So the last slide for today, the My Lai Massacre, took place in 1968. It was covered up by the military. It was a search and destroy mission where U.S. soldiers are sent to My Lai, which was thought to be a Viet Cong stronghold. When they get there, only women, children, and old men are there. So no soldiers, no one of fighting age, no one that posed a threat to Americans. One morning, soldiers rounded up 500 civilians and executed them. American society expressed outrage over this. When the newspapers and war correspondents hear that Americans are killing innocent civilians and children, they're going to be extremely upset, and this is where we get that term baby killers during the war. The next slide, you can see some of the devastation that happens. You can see some of the dead bodies, and in that, you don't see anybody in military uniforms. You don't see any men. You don't see any weapons. And so, these soldiers have been so stressed out. They've been fighting this war for so long, finally kind of snap, and they kill innocent civilians. And the perception of the war is going to be extremely negative. All right, that's it for the video lectures this week. We'll finish up video lectures next week. Have a great Friday tomorrow. Do the discussion board that I post. and go Pacers. I'll see you guys.